Hey kids, you like rock'em sock'em robots? What about shooting them big bad robots? How about stomping baby robots? You like diabetes? Well, I got the game for you. Welcome to the fun yet frustrating Roboquest. Smash robots with fists of iron, or blow them up, burn them up, freeze them, or perhaps just poke away at their soulless husks with throwing knives. We got it all, yeah! Sure, you'll run into complete bullshit like these arena rooms where a million things are shooting at you at once while you run in circles trying to chink away at their health because they're all bullet sponges. You slam your head into your keyboard in frustration over and over at the sound of that familiar yelling from the back of the house. I know, Grandma. I'm screaming because I'm playing a game, Grandma. Gall. Leave me alone, Grandma. Stop crying, Grandma. Why are you making me wear high heels and lingerie, Grandma? But eventually you bust through these stupid arena rooms and immediately find yourself facing a mini-boss with little to no HP on your part. But at the end of the day, when all is said and done and you once again see that oh too familiar gray death screen, you give out a hefty sigh and click that start game button once more. Because when it all comes down to it, Roboquest may sometimes be a frustrating, flawed experience, but the fun still outweighs the frustration in my humble opinion. So join me, my friends, Jarek Defiler the Patient Gamer, or not so patient gamer in this instance, as I give you a glimpse of Roboquest. Let's dip in, shall we? For starters, my little brother and I only played the game on hard mode, so take that into consideration when watching this video. I cannot speak to the easier difficulties. This is where my biases lie. Now, Roboquest is a first-person shooter roguelite where you and your brobot play a robot of your choice from a class pool of 6, with 5 of those needing to be unlocked on your journey. Each class has their own abilities and perks to unlock, as well as varying playstyles that can take advantage of the different varieties of weapons in the game. And there is a fairly decent amount of diversity when it comes to weapons, my friends. You got your rocket launchers, shotguns, kunais, I don't know how you say that, fist weapons, sniper rifles, machine guns, guns that spawn sentry turrets, and more. And on top of that, you also have different damage types: burn, cryo, shock, and your standard default physical damage. There are also 2 ammunition types, magazine and energy-based. Magazine-based weapons are your basic shoot and reload, while energy-based weapons have an overheat function, which counts as a reload, as well as possibly gaining more power or fire rate the hotter they get. There are also a plethora of weapon affixes one can get throughout their various runs. There are some that are more interesting affixes, such as bouncing, piercing, homing, or explosive projectiles, but to be honest, the majority of affixes suffer from Diablo 3 and 4 syndrome, where they're fairly boring and are just percentage increases. Unfortunate. Now, what makes Roboquest fun is the gameplay loop. They generally did a good job with the gun mechanics. Each gun feels pretty smooth and unique with decent weight behind them, but they're not without their flaws. More on that later. There is a good deal of replayability in Roboquest, as there should be given this is a roguelite, and the mix of different class playstyles with a variety of weapons and upgrades does have me coming back for more. The classes feel different enough to make you want to switch things up, but still familiar to the point where you don't feel overwhelmed when you switch. One class may excel in a sniping playstyle, while another may be best at being an up-close brawler. Depending on their individual perks, there is a decent amount of builds and fun you can have with each class. Each run you will collect currency in the forms of wrenches and power cells. Power cells is the run-per-run currency. Use them in the battlefield to purchase new weapons, perks, upgrades, and more just for that run. The meta progression in Roboquest is also present, being a roguelite, but not all too interesting in my opinion. You have a base camp with a few kiosks that you upgrade over time, or you can use to show your progression in the museum. There's also some cool toggleable upgrades called gadgets that grant you some cool bonuses like crouch jump for a boost, gain movement speed from riding rails, which is basically grinding in the game, or gain a power cell upon level up, things like that. But you also have your workshop upgrades, which are things like have the possibility, not the guarantee, to offer you a higher quality item in your chests. And then the upgrades are stackable, so instead of unlocking more interesting upgrades, you're kinda just boosting the ones you already have. So after an upgrade, you have the possibility of being offered 2 quality items instead of 1. Whoopee! The majority of the workshop unlocks are chance-based, which is very odd. Chance to do this, chance to get that, no guarantees. That does not a good roguelike system make. Usually roguelites will have you do an event or an achievement to unlock stuff, like Risk of Rain 2 for example, which I consider to be the best roguelite I've ever played anyways. But having wrenches be the main currency that you just collect over time and buy things in the workshop is somewhat boring, especially when the unlocks aren't really that great to begin with. This is very odd because Roboquest has a good system when it comes to unlocking the gadgets. You get them by doing various little tasks or by simply finding their hidden areas in the world space. We went in blind, so all the gadgets we found were just by chance or doing the proper steps, such as giving an NPC their swim trunks or a specific weapon they want. It was fun. Taking a similar approach to unlocking the perks in the workshop would have been far more beneficial to the player in my opinion. But that is one thing the game does fairly well, that is offering a bunch of little hidden unlocks throughout the maps or tasks you have to figure out. Sure, you can just wiki it all, but you can figure it out yourself as well. They aren't too convoluted and they're pretty fun at times. Now, there are a lot of criticisms to address here for Roboquest. As I mentioned in the beginning of this video, the arena rooms are very frustrating and not really fun to experience in my opinion. What these are these small spaces that the game will lock you into, forcing you to wipe out a respawning mob of enemies that share a, I guess you could say, boss health bar. So for each enemy down, a chunk of the health bar is reduced, and the doors won't unlock until you bring that health bar to 0. Not that fun. The major problem with these rooms is that they're just bullet hells with a plethora of graphical elements shooting all over the place at once, so you often can't see what's going on because there's just too much going on. They lack virtually any cover because the enemies just rush your face or often shoot through the cover. Yeah, that happens a lot. And the enemy bots tend to have instant lock-on mechanics, so as soon as you poke your head around a corner, a bullet is already coming your way. In hard mode at least, you will often come out of these rooms missing a huge chunk of your health pool. You can side strafe and just run in circles around the border of the room to avoid a great deal of the damage, but they will still eventually get you. It's not a skill issue, it's a numbers issue. There's just too much coming at you at once to avoid. If you aren't playing the class that has an invulnerability bubble, you're gonna have a bad time. And to top that off, the next room often has a mini-boss in it. Most of the mini-bosses aren't a huge problem, mind you, but some can be. So if you live through the arena, you might just be delaying the inevitable. That said, I'm sure on easier difficulties this might not be that big of an issue, I don't know. But we here at Jarek Defiler LLC do not play on easy mode. Unless it's a story-driven RPG or something. You know, just want to chill and stuff. Yeah. Another criticism with the game is the platforming aspect. There is a bit of verticality to Roboquest, allowing you to jump up to have a height advantage against your enemy, for whatever that's worth. The problem is, it's a bit janky. First-person platforming has always been rough in the gaming industry, and Roboquest is no different. You will find yourself often struggling to get to certain areas or just having a nightmare of a time fighting certain bosses where platforming is a necessity. You also have this head stomp mechanic where if you jump on an enemy's head, a la Mario style, you damage them. Some classes even have builds that revolve around this mechanic. However, it's super janky because oftentimes you'll land right next to the enemy rather than on them, because what you're seeing in the game isn't what's actually being calculated. It can be a pain in the ass to consistently hop on an enemy's head. Still, the platforming aspect is passable, just could use some tweaking in my opinion. A lot of user reviews complain of Roboquest being samey in the sense that the enemies are all alike and the maps, although supposedly procedurally generated, still have two similar layouts. I would agree with the map aspect, they do feel a bit samey at times. Once you go through them 2 or 3 times, you basically know the layout and they're very linear anyways, so it's not the most engaging construct. But I don't really play the game for the maps, I play for the combat, and in that regard, I think the enemy variety is perfectly fine. Sure, at the end of the day, you're just dodging bullets and jumping on heads, or trying to jump on heads, but there are some enemies that you may have to approach in a different way. And each biome or level has different enemy types that bring something a little new to the table. You also have some that may be resistant to your type of damage, so you might have to switch things up a bit in weapon choice. That said, I do feel there is a problem with difficulty spikes and bullet sponge enemies as the levels progress. The first and second levels are a breeze and find you plowing through enemies like Tyrion Lannister in a brothel. But once you hit the third levels, the enemies just become bullet sponges and your weapons that were tearing up the bad guys not 1 minute earlier suddenly feel completely useless. You will start taking massive damage and doing very little to the point where you just get to the next arena room and die. Fairly frustrating, but again, this is on hard mode. And I think it's fair to review the game based on my experience because hard mode still is a part of the game. Now, another big problem is weapon balance. Sure, you got a plethora of weapons to choose from. I think the weapon diversity is really good. However, there will be a lot of weapons that are just better than the rest. They will have different tiers of quality as well as levels that you upgrade. You'll have your gray commons, green uncommons, blue superiors, purple epics, and eventually orange fantastic and legendaries. The problem is, some weapons are just so much better than others that it's often worth getting a common of one type of weapon versus a superior of another. That's kinda wonky. There are some weapons that just aren't even worth bothering with, and that sucks. I know it can be tough to balance a bunch of weapons in a game like this, but every weapon should at least be somewhat viable. As it stands now, there's some that just aren't. And the fact that they lock out some weapons in the first act makes it even worse, because you don't know how you want to build because you're most likely going to get rid of your crappy Act 1 weapon in exchange for something better once you get to Act 2. Bit of a mess. And back to the affixes. As I said before, most of them are just plain boring. This is true with the class perks as well. 10% more cryo damage, 15% more damage against flying enemies, 20% burn damage, whoop-dee! Just boring stuff, and unfortunately, that's the majority of the affixes you'll see in Roboquest. Lots and lots of percentages. Having said that, that doesn't mean the gameplay loop is boring. It isn't, it just could use a bit more imagination when it comes to customizing your kit. Although I haven't played it, a lot of users compare Roboquest to Gunfire Reborn and state that the latter is far superior when it comes to customizing more interesting builds. So if you're familiar with Gunfire Reborn, then keep that in mind in case you want to dip into Roboquest, as it just might not tickle your fancy. Now, I know most of what I talked about here was the game's flaws more than its positives, but don't get me wrong, I still think it's worth recommending Roboquest, although having been in early access for a few years and releasing fully in November of 2023, the game is still being patched and tweaked, so who knows what might be coming down the pipeline. There is enough content here to warrant a purchase, I feel, and the replayability isn't bad at all. However, do I feel that you can get hundreds and hundreds of hours from it? No, not really, unfortunately. As of recording this, I'm at 29.8 hours and I've unlocked the entire workshop as well as most of the gadgets, and that was without systematically trying to unlock things, instead just doing it in passing. That said, I haven't actually beaten a run yet, which is funny and somewhat sad. I need to get good. But yeah, I feel that once you beat and unlock everything, there may not be much to keep you around like other roguelites, so take that as you will. However, at the end of the day, I find that Roboquest is a fairly decent Robutt-Smashing romp. The gameplay loop is fun, the gunplay is good, the movement is decent, albeit a little flawed. It's just the progression, weapon, and affix balance and difficulty spikes that are mostly lacking. So maybe pick it up on sale if you're interested. And like I always do in my game reviews and first impressions, here's a snippet from the soundtrack. Composed by Noisecream, very apt, Roboquest soundtrack boasts a heavy electronic synthwave headbanger that gets you pumped up like Doom 2016. This track is titled Cyberwar. This has been Jarek Defiler, the Patient Gamer, bunny hopping robot babies. You all have a good morning, afternoon, evening, or night depending on where you are. Breakdown.